because what you're about to see is exactly why preparation matters. Robert Irwin, son of the legendary Steve Irwin, thought he was coming on The View to talk about his new wildlife documentary and conservation efforts. The 20-year-old had been making rounds on various talk shows, charming audiences with his passion for animals and carrying on his father's incredible legacy. Every interview had gone smoothly, hosts were respectful, questions were thoughtful, and Robert's natural charisma shone through as he spoke about protecting endangered species. But Joy Behar had other plans. The moment Robert walked onto that stage, something felt different. The usual warm welcome was replaced by a cold, almost predatory smile from Joy. The other hosts seemed unusually quiet, almost like they knew what was coming but couldn't do anything to stop it. Robert, being the polite and professional young man he is, smiled and waved to the audience, completely unaware that he was walking into what could only be described as a verbal ambush. "Welcome back to The View," Joy announced, her voice carrying an edge that the studio audience didn't quite catch yet. "We're here with Robert Irwin, wildlife conservationist and son of the late Steve Irwin. Now, Robert, I have to ask you something that's been bothering me for quite some time." Robert shifted slightly in his seat, his media training kicking in as he maintained his composed smile. "Of course, Joy. I'm here to answer any questions you might have." "Good, because I've been watching your interviews, your documentaries, your whole public persona, really," Joy continued, leaning forward with what could only be described as a hunter's focus. "And I have to wonder, don't you think you're just riding on your father's coattails? I mean, what have you actually accomplished on your own?" The studio fell silent. The audience seemed to sense the shift in energy, and the camera caught Robert's face as his smile faltered for just a moment. But he recovered quickly. Years of dealing with difficult questions about his father's legacy having prepared him for moments like this. "Well, Joy, I understand why people might think that," Robert replied, his voice steady, but you could hear the slight tension creeping in. "But I've been working in wildlife conservation since I was a child. I've helped rescue thousands of animals. I've worked on breeding programs for endangered species, and I've dedicated my life to continuing the important work my father started." Joy wasn't satisfied. In fact, she seemed to be just getting warmed up. "But that's exactly my point," she pressed, her voice becoming more aggressive. "You're continuing his work. Where's your original contribution? It seems to me like you're just playing dress up in khakis and pretending to be Steve Irwin. Don't you think it's time to find your own identity instead of living in your father's shadow?" The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. Whoopi Goldberg looked like she wanted to intervene, but Joy was on a roll and wasn't about to be stopped. Robert took a deep breath, and you could see him fighting to maintain his composure. "Joy, with all due respect, conservation isn't about personal glory or making a name for yourself. It's about protecting animals and their habitats. Whether I'm continuing my father's work or creating my own path, the important thing is that the work gets done." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, actually rolling her eyes on live television. "That's such a convenient answer. You know what I think? I think you're afraid to step out from behind your father's reputation because you know you don't have what it takes to make it on your own. You're 20 years old, Robert. When are you going to grow up and stop playing with animals?" That's when something changed in Robert's expression. The polite, media-trained smile completely disappeared, replaced by something much more authentic and infinitely more dangerous. His jaw tightened, his hands gripped the arms of his chair, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the studio sit up and take notice. "Playing with animals?" Robert repeated, his Australian accent becoming more pronounced as his emotions intensified. "Joy, do you have any idea what my work actually involves? Do you know that last month I helped save a mother koala and her joey from a bushfire? Do you know that the breeding program I helped develop has successfully reintroduced echidnas to areas where they'd been extinct for 30 years? Joy started to interrupt, but Robert wasn't finished. "You want to talk about growing up? Let me tell you about growing up. I grew up watching my father get bitten by venomous snakes while trying to relocate them away from populated areas. I grew up helping my mother run a wildlife hospital where we've treated over 100,000 injured animals. I grew up understanding that conservation isn't a game or a career move, it's a responsibility." The tension in the studio was palpable now. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word, and the other host looked genuinely concerned about where this confrontation was heading. Joy, however, seemed to interpret Robert's passion as weakness, and she made what would turn out to be a critical error in judgment. "Look, Robert, I understand you're emotional about this," she said, her tone now condescending in a way that made viewers at home cringe. "But emotion doesn't change facts. The fact is, you're famous because your father was famous. The fact is, without the Irwin name, you'd just be another guy playing with animals in a zoo. And the fact is, maybe it's time you accepted that and found a real career." Robert went completely still, the kind of still that predators recognize right before their prey either runs or fights. And Robert Irwin was definitely his father's son. A real career? Robert's voice was quiet now, but there was something in it that made everyone lean forward to hear better. "Joy, do you know what my father was doing when he died?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Joy clearly hadn't expected Robert to turn the conversation toward his father's death, and for the first time since the interview began, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. But Robert wasn't asking the question for sympathy or to shut down the conversation. He was asking because he had a point to make, and he was about to make it in a way that would leave Joy scrambling. "He was filming a documentary about stingrays," Robert continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Not for fame, not for money, but because he wanted people to understand that even the most feared creatures in the ocean are just trying to survive. He died doing what he loved, but more importantly, he died trying to make the world a better place for animals that can't speak for themselves." Joy tried to interject. "Robert, I didn't mean to." "No, let me finish," Robert cut her off, and the authority in his voice was unmistakable. "You want to talk about real careers? You want to talk about what matters? My father could have made millions doing circus acts with crocodiles. He could have turned Australia Zoo into a theme park focused on entertainment instead of conservation. But he chose education. He chose research. He chose to use his platform to make people care about wildlife conservation." The camera captured Joy's face as she realized she had severely miscalculated. The young man sitting across from her wasn't the naive 20-year-old she had expected to intimidate. This was someone who had been raised in the spotlight. Someone who understood exactly how to use media attention to make a point. And someone who was now completely focused on making her understand the magnitude of her mistake. "And you know what, Joy?" Robert continued, leaning forward in his chair. "Every single day I wake up and try to live up to that legacy. Not because I'm riding coattails, but because the work matters. Do you know how many species have gone extinct just in the time we've been sitting here talking? Do you understand that there are animals alive today because of the conservation programs my family has developed?" Whoopi Goldberg tried to step in. "Robert, we appreciate your passion, and I think what Joy was trying to say." "No, Whoopi, I know exactly what Joy was trying to say," Robert replied, not taking his eyes off Joy. "She was trying to diminish my work and my father's legacy because she thinks conservation is just playing with animals. She thinks that because I'm young and because I'm passionate about wildlife, that somehow makes my work less legitimate." Joy finally found her voice again, but her tone had shifted dramatically. Gone was the aggressive confidence, replaced by something that sounded almost defensive. "Robert, I think you're overreacting. I was simply asking legitimate questions about your career path." "Legitimate questions?" Robert's voice rose slightly, and you could hear the frustration building. "Joy, you accused me of playing dress-up and told me to find a real career. How is that a legitimate question? Would you ask David Attenborough if he was just playing with animals? Would you tell Jane Goodall to find a real job?" The comparison hit its mark. The audience began to murmur, and you could see some people in the crowd shaking their heads in disapproval at Joy's line of questioning. Joy, realizing she was losing control of the narrative, tried a different approach. "Look, Robert, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I was simply trying to explore whether young people in your position feel pressure to follow in their parents' footsteps." "No, Joy, there's been no misunderstanding," Robert shot back immediately. "You specifically said I was afraid to step out from behind my father's reputation. You said I don't have what it takes to make it on my... You told me to stop playing with animals and find a real career. Those weren't questions about pressure. Those were attacks on my character and my life's work." The other hosts were now clearly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes was staring down at her notes. Alyssa Farah Griffin was fidgeting with her earpiece, and Whoopi looked like she was calculating how to salvage the interview. But Robert wasn't done. In fact, he was just getting started. You want to know about pressure, Joy? The pressure isn't living up to my father's legacy. The pressure is sitting here listening to someone who clearly hasn't done 5 minutes of research about my work, telling me that conservation doesn't matter. The pressure is trying to explain to someone who gets paid to have opinions why saving endangered species is more important than television ratings. Joy's face flushed red. Now wait just a minute, young man. No, you wait, Robert interrupted, and his voice carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the studio freeze. I've been polite. I've been respectful. I've answered your questions, even when they were clearly designed to make me look bad. But I'm not going to sit here and let you insult my father's memory or diminish work that literally saves lives. The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The audience was completely silent, the other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear, and Joy was clearly struggling to figure out how to respond to this level of pushback from someone she had expected to steamroll. I never insulted your father's memory, Joy said, but her voice lacked conviction. Robert's eyebrows shot up. You said I was living in his shadow. You said I was afraid to make it on my own. You said I was playing dress up in khakis and pretending to be him. If that's not insulting his memory, then what exactly would you call it? Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Robert wasn't finished. And here's what really bothers me, Joy. You're sitting here attacking a 20-year-old who has dedicated his life to conservation, while you make a living giving hot takes on television. You want to talk about real careers? You want to talk about making a difference? How many animals have you saved? How many species have you helped protect? How many young people have you inspired to care about something bigger than themselves? The studio was dead silent. You could practically hear the producers in the control room trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial or let this play out. Joy looked like she had been slapped, and the other hosts were exchanging glances that clearly said they had never seen anything like this before. But Joy Behar didn't become a television host by backing down from confrontation. And despite being clearly outmatched, she decided to double down in the worst possible way. You know what, Robert? I think I touched a nerve here, and maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Maybe you do need to hear that not everyone thinks you're special just because of your last name. That's when Robert Irwin truly lost it. The transformation was instant and shocking. Robert's entire demeanor changed in a way that sent a visible ripple of alarm through everyone on that stage. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly, his knuckles went white, his jaw clenched, and when he spoke, his voice carried a level of controlled fury that made the entire studio hold its breath. Special because of my last name? Robert's voice was dangerously quiet now. Joy, do you have any idea what you just said? Joy, perhaps finally realizing she had pushed too far, started to backtrack. Robert, I think we should. No, absolutely not. Robert cut her off, standing up from his chair in one fluid motion. You just told me that people only think I'm special because of my last name. My father's name. The name of a man who died trying to make the world better for animals. So let me tell you exactly what that name means to me. The camera captured every moment as Robert stood there, towering over the seated hosts, his entire body radiating an intensity that was both compelling and slightly terrifying. This wasn't the polished, media-trained young conservationist anymore. This was raw emotion, and it was about to explode. That name means getting up at 4 a.m. to help deliver baby animals, because that's when nature doesn't care about your schedule. That name means spending your childhood learning to read the body language of crocodiles, because one mistake could kill you. That name means watching your father get attacked by animals he was trying to save, and never once hearing him blame them for following their instincts. Joy tried to interrupt again. Robert, please sit down and... I'm not sitting down, Robert snapped, his Australian accent now thick with emotion. You wanted to have this conversation, so we're going to have it. That name you think makes me special? It also means growing up, knowing that people are watching every move you make, waiting for you to fail, waiting to say you're not as good as your father. It means carrying the weight of a legacy that changed how the world thinks about wildlife conservation. The other hosts were frozen in place, clearly unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. The audience was completely riveted, phones undoubtedly recording every second of what was becoming one of the most explosive live television moments in years. But you know what, Joy? Robert continued, his voice rising now. I'm not ashamed of that name. I'm not afraid of that legacy. Because every time someone tells me I'm just riding coattails, every time someone like you suggests I should find a real career, it reminds me exactly why this work matters. It reminds me that there are people in this world who care more about tearing others down than building anything up themselves. Joy's face was now bright red. Whether from embarrassment or anger was impossible to tell. Young man, you need to calm down and show some respect. Respect? Robert's voice cracked with disbelief. You want to talk to me about respect? You ambushed me on live television. You attacked my character, my work, and my father's memory. You told me to stop playing with animals and get a real job. And now you want to lecture me about respect? He took a step closer to the host table, and you could see the security team off camera starting to shift nervously. Let me tell you about respect, Joy. Respect is doing your research before interviewing someone. Respect is asking questions that actually matter, instead of trying to create drama for ratings. Respect is understanding that some things are more important than your personal opinions about someone you've never met.